Hello there. Welcome to Talent and Growth Live, the roundtable. I've got 2 out of the 3 guests right now. Nick is just having a few technical difficulties, and of course, it's Blue Monday, so everything's going to go wrong, isn't it? So hopefully, we'll add her in a little bit later on. But thank you, everyone who's joined us today. Thanks for all the support from last week. So absolutely, we're going to keep going with these roundtables because we're getting a lot of interest and good feedback. So yeah. Here we go. So, of course, Blue Monday today, and what better way to cheer us all up with a nice, healthy conversation about data in talent acquisition. We have an international flavour today. We've got people from around, not just in England today. Rassam and Joey introduce themselves in a second. Listen, audience, please, as always, comments and questions throughout. I'll post the comments up on the screen so you can see everyone asks a good question. Only if it's a good question, then I will ask the guests what they think, but we want it as interactive as possible because certainly we don't all know it, or at least I don't anyway. So certainly interested to hear anyone's feedback as well. So Joey, if you wouldn't mind doing the honours, just introducing yourself. Obviously fresh off a win for Arsenal yesterday, so you and I are both in a good mood, but do you mind giving us a bit of an introduction to who you are and what you do?
Yeah, sure, definitely. I'm Joey Kuxel. I've been in the recruitment sector quite a long time, since back in 2000. Worked in big companies, small private equities, and in-house freelancer. And I'm also hybrid, which is sourcer as well as the tech recruiter. And currently working in a very exciting company as a global talent acquisition manager. It's Joey.
My man. Thanks, Joey. Thank you so much. I'll do a quick sound test with Nick. Nick, can you hear us? No, you cannot. But luckily, Rassam is in the house. Rassam, how you doing, mate? Can you give us a quick intro to who you are and what you do?
Sure, I can hear you. I'm calling in from Paris. And to go further on the football news, PSG lost last night. So I'm not in such a good mood, but I'll make my best. So I'm calling from Paris. I've been working in TA, talent acquisition function, since more or less 15 years, in-house since a bit more than 7-8 years, and a background in agencies, mainly tech, digital, IT functions as well. And today I'm working at Iliad, which is a major telecommunication and media company in France and Europe.
Fantastic. Look, great to have you with us, Rassam. So, guys, we're going to do what we can with the 3 of us. I'm sure we'll be all right. And hopefully Nick can contribute in a little while if she gets the audio working. So, look, today we're talking about data. And as we head into 2023, data is such a key part of our business strategies, our hiring strategies. And I think as well, data has played a big part in giving us in TA credibility when it comes to hiring managers, because I think, as we talked about a little bit last week, not everybody really knows what we do and how we do it and how hard it can be sometimes. And certainly when we start bringing data in to back up what we're saying and the feelings the business have, it adds credibility to us and our processes. But look, let's start first of all, Rassam. Let's start with you. So, which types of data do you feel we should be focusing on the most in our TA teams, and why?
So there's no easy answer to this question, but I'd say that since I switched from agency to in-house, my view on this changed majorly as well. So in the past years, I feel that there's 2 main types of data and KPIs that people want to see internally when you're in-house. The first one is kind of high level, baseline KPIs that leadership wants to see to evaluate the performance of a team. And then there's the set of KPIs that, as a leader or as a team member, you want to check into to see how your team's doing and how individually you're doing. So I'd say that on the top high level one, most of them are quite similar, I feel, from a company to another. It's basically, answering the question, are we filling enough roles versus our goals? So completion to staff plan, how many offers we made, how many offer acceptance we have, sometimes tracking diversity at a very high level. And then there's the second aspect, that is more linked to the individual and the team sets of more or less identifying the roadblocks.
Right. Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can now, Nick.
Can you hear us, Nick? No, she can't. Sorry, Nick. Sorry, Rassam. Carry on.
No,
I shouldn't have cut you off there. Go on.
So yeah, the second one, which is basically more linked to the individuals and the team performance of how specifically we're doing at different stages of the funnel, and that's where the funnel metric kind of vision was really helpful for me, and maybe we're gonna talk about it further on.
We absolutely will. And it's interesting actually, because you mentioned the transition from agency to internal, and I think in agency it's probably we've always used data. I think at least to some point, for how much money you build for number one, but how many interviews you got out, how many CVs you got out, and I think maybe we're using it a lot now, but it's a newer phenomenon, isn't it? Using it in house, would you say?
New, I mean, relatively new if you take on the history of recruitment as a whole in the past 100 years or 50 years. But in the era of internal houses, I mean, internal teams being more and more, let's say, performance and having more skill sets, I'd say that building into ATS features, understanding how we can use tracking reports of ATS in-house has been, for me at least, in the past 5 to 8 years, quite new.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So it's not fresh as a daisy, but it's something that it's made its way in, and I think we're still trying to understand it and use the right data a little bit more. Maybe it's a little bit, and I think probably it's a little bit more complicated than if we're doing than the agency side anyway. But Joey, look, if we go back to the original question, so for you, what types of data should we be focusing on in our TA teams and why?
Yeah, and Rassam was spot on. It's two different areas, agency compared to in-house. In-house, we got a lot of areas. You can't just focus on the hiring process data. You need to work with the different sub teams as well, understand the market a little bit. So I would say start with, we use market reports. Its data is very important. If you don't know your audience, where they come from, where they base, what kind of skill competency. So you need that market report, or talent report, some people like to call. That is one of the key. The other one is the report. You really need to understand your competitor market with the salaries and in different areas and other data. You should really use it. And when it's come to TA itself, for the hiring process, I would say time to hire, the time to quality hire, and you should see the duration of the hire and how can you do it, and where does it start, where does it end, and some competitor analysis as well to understand, which is related to your employee branding. So there's so many of them you can really dig into and create a kind of data environment. But let's dig into it and discuss a little bit further.
Absolutely. I'm going to try with trepidation one more time. See, Nick, can you hear us?
I can hear you. I've joined the call. Thank you. My apologies. Working financial services, our firewall is so intense that I couldn't actually get on from here, but it's okay. We found a workaround. I'm here. Welcome.
No problem. I appreciate your perseverance. So thank you for joining us. Nick, do you want to give us a quick intro to who you are and what you do?
Yeah, no, absolutely. So I head up a talent acquisition team for Marix. We're a financial service organisation based by Liverpool Street Station. We have 1,300 people, fast growing, 2 acquisitions last year, and we're mainly focused on commodities on a global basis.
Fantastic. And this is Rassam and this is Joey. Obviously, you haven't met, but this is these two. These are your co-speakers. So all we did was ask the first question. So you're right on time, which was really just which types of data should we be focusing on the most in our TA team? So what's your perspective on that?
Sure. I mean, my point of view, I view it as a journey. The biggest thing, and part of the reason I'm here, is I think the quicker we can put our data in a format that C-suite can understand, the better momentum we're going to have as an organisation. So it is a journey. We've moved from, in my view, some very simplistic stats to being on the journey to be able to report on actual value of recruitment. And what I'm particularly keen about is a net hiring score. So actually trying to get a quality of hire in there alongside the actual data of stats of what's actually people being hired, their source, where they're coming from, and actually what the actual absolute cost is of recruitment to the business.
Fantastic. And that quality of hire, big talking point right now. We'll dive into that one in a bit. Looking forward to talking about that one. And Nick, and if we stay with you, how should we be measuring our data in an efficient a logical way, which then when we can, of course, present back to the business and use to influence. Because, and I was saying before you came on that, sometimes, the rest of the business doesn't know what we do in TA, how we do it, how hard it is. So it's important we use that data to give us the credibility. So how do we measure and present that back in the most, I suppose, effective way?
Sure. Appreciating people coming from a number of businesses on the call. I would say you need to find someone in your business who's incredibly good with data, figures, stats, etc., to work alongside with you, to align however you're reporting the business in other areas as near to TA as possible. But in terms of what I would look to obviously represent, there's got to be a source of hire where people are coming from, be it direct, agent, referral, internal. There's no way of getting around that. And then on top of that, it's really in terms of volume. So people have visibility of the business areas that are hiring, the countries that are hiring. So a global snapshot from my view of what people have done on a monthly basis against a backdrop of a year to date. So that's important. But the bits that are, for me, the journey we're on is the net hiring score, which is very much like a net promoter score. So trying to ensure that we have the ability to demonstrate quality in a world where we can't measure quality per se. And the other one is hiring velocity, which I can come back to and touch on a bit more. But instead of being time to hire, that we're basically time to agreed delivery date. And that's where the real success lies.
Fantastic. Joey, what do you think on that?
Yeah, I totally agree with her. We really need to dig into it and understand a little bit. There's a lot of velocity going on, which we like to call VUCA, and all this economic climate, and people scared really to go somewhere else. And it's just data effect from that onwards. When we source our efforts showing us, which is lately trying to reach out and get people in, one of the conversion ratios I had it like, to be able to get one person in, we need to reach out and talk to 300 people. So that is a huge number, and tell us how the difficult times are ahead of us. So I completely agree with what Nick said. So we can dig it into a little bit more there.
And Rassam, once we've got this data, how should we process it and share it with our teams in the business from your experience?
Yeah, so it's a good question, because I suppose that when we're talking about the high level kind of KPIs where the business and leaders often have more or less the same views of, we want to know how many offers we made, how many hires we made, are we on target, are we late? And sometimes more level 2, 3 kind of KPIs are really so contextual that it's difficult to just give them globally. And so what I find quite efficient in the past is understanding where are the sub teams and the sub moments and rituals where you want to provide granular information and co-build that information with the business, because like a CEO or a VP would only maybe have once per month or once per quarter a time to deep dive on the high level 1 or 2 KPIs, but then you have your hiring managers, your leaders that hire with you, and you build a team as peers with them. And that's where I think it's easier to slice departments, functions, locations, because obviously what does it really make sense to say, like, we had 10,000 inbound applications as a whole, versus what you really want to know is in Nuremberg's senior sales, what's the trend? Because last time we met 3 months ago, this was the issue we wanted to tackle as a team. So I'd say that the way you present it, and we'll see it, and what you don't want to track versus what you really want to focus on, can be really important. And building them in sub teams per location or per functions with the leaders has been the most efficient way for me before.
And is there any data you think we should be avoiding or moving away from? We talk about maybe too much. What's your thoughts on that?
Well, I think that anything that is linked on individual performance below 6 months historic of data is always a bit tricky. Like, for instance, I don't know, your hiring capacity in the organization for a recruiter per month hire is, let's say, 2 or 3, and then you have a kind of top performer that hits 8 in a quarter, and then you could want to only focus on that and overreact in a way and say, okay, well, we're gonna put the target a bit higher for this individual or even as a team, or sometimes overreact in the bad way of saying, okay, we really need to take more tools, change an ATS, fire this person, hire someone else because there's underperformance. And anything that for me is showing a trend individually below 6 months, for instance, is something I tend to less focus on and more focus on trends, collective trends over a 6 months period. But again, it's also the maturity of the data set that you have, and are you able to have an analysis on the duration versus just have X amounts of Excel sheets everywhere with no kind of same baseline of how you read the data sets. But yeah, individual versus collective kind of KPIs, I think is a good way to not focus on too much details.
And we were speaking the other day, maybe it's before Christmas actually, around the differences between working in a bigger business and more of a startup. Does that change, or the emphasis on which types of data, has it changed for you in terms of the size of the business that you're at now compared to being in a startup type business?
Well, yeah, I mean, it completely changed the context of your business. What's your strategy as a whole? Like, do you even have a strategy? Often I see, business leaders asking for KPIs, like, okay, what's our source of hires? And so you say, well, X amount of sourcing, X amount of applicants, and X amount of agencies or whatsoever. But there's nothing in front as a strategy initially. That's what does that mean versus the initial strategy, because we have a shitty brand, so we know that in any case we won't have a lot of applicants from day one, so let's focus on referrals and do this and this. And so if you're not intentional on what you want to track and again see it as a trend more than just a number, it's difficult. So to get to your point, when I was working in my previous company, we were like very granular on this because we had a lot of implication of different kind of people. We would track, the conversion. Like we had a talent marketing team that would only track the top of funnel kind of conversions of inbound, versus sourcing team, where obviously we want to be a bit more granular in the sources response rate. But does it make sense if you're in the 360 organization where your recruiter has to do talent marketing, sourcing, and closing? Do you really want to, tell him or her what's your positive response rate on LinkedIn versus see it as maybe a number of offers extended, etc.? So context is really important. And right now in my situation, I'm in that phase of trying to understand the strategy that we need to put in place before even trying to find the tools and means to put data and numbers in front of them.
I think you say context, that's got to be the absolute key thing, because obviously within TA, everyone thinks they're a brilliant recruiter. Everyone thinks they understand all the data. And my view is very much keep it very simple. And the more technical, the more different ways of slicing, dice the data, the more you're likely to run into challenges. So by putting in, I can obviously talk country data, I can talk about department data, but when I start breaking that down and down again, if, for example, I speak with a hiring manager who has a incredibly detailed view of their area, they're going to know more than me. And they may say, actually, Nick, we've actually had 3 hires in this area and your data says 2. And even in representing that, which may have just been a lag in the data or it was reporting the wrong month, it discredits all the other data we put through. So for me, it's all about the context. I'd almost rather putting the data, keeping it very simple, and actually then understanding more the trends, i.e. you've hired more than last year. So taking it away from the data to description and context, rather than enabling people to potentially fine tune the data to almost look for inaccuracies, because you can't always have a perfect data set. The very nature of what we do is constantly moving.
Is there any piece of data, Nick, that you hear people throw around, you think that just doesn't mean anything, or it's just not worth even looking at? Does anything stand out to you?
I do get asked about this, I think externally and internally. People are obsessed with the time to hire stat, and I don't really see where the value from that comes. Okay, if you have a team, you're recruiting thousands of hires, and you bring someone in at 30 days rather than 35 days, you have to actually question the value. Whereas to me, it's about the quality of hire, which again is difficult to view. But in the world that we're moving to, where we can measure quality of hire, for me, that's such a more valuable metric rather than those days. Now, I appreciate we can't have roles out there sort of going on 180 days plus, so there is a balance to it. But I mentioned earlier something called hiring velocity, which is something that I feel very passionate about, and we're starting to pilot it here. I would say pilot because that's the only way of doing it. When a hiring manager says they want to have someone in play, for example, in let's say yesterday. So looking at it, it's going to take us at least 6 weeks to get through a advertising, potentially agency, to interviews, to get that shortlist to actually offering. Then there's a fairly high chance the person will be on 3 months notice period. So with the best will in the world, we can't even bring someone in within 4.5 months. Now, once you've got that date there, we've agreed to it, the hiring managers agree to it. That for me is where the hiring velocity comes through. So the question is, can you deliver that in time? And if it goes over that agreed time, that's when it starts to have penalties for the business. And for me, that is a much greater value. And in terms of implementation, the best way of doing this, we are working with hiring managers who are very much bought into this idea. We're only working with 3 at the moment, but the aim is to view this and people then have clarity of hire, and then we can start working more holistically across the organization. But it's not something you could implement, certainly where I am, overnight and say, we're going to work with this new metric. But that for me is a better metrics than the time to hire.
And let's talk about that then for a second, the hiring velocity. So how you're kind of piloting that with Marix, but how have you gone about implementing that with your 3 stakeholders?
As we all know, there are easier hiring managers than others. So we have worked with them. We've explained the principle behind it. We're saying what we're trying to do is get data so we can start working towards meaningful percentages with a view to them being able to reflect how we are actually tracking against the expectations in the business. What we don't want to be doing is going way over that. And I appreciate that recruitment is both an art and a science. It's not an Amazon delivery that will arrive at X time at the end of your desk. But providing we know that's what we're aiming towards, that for me is a better way of doing that. And we're getting really good buy-in. People want to be part of it because most people have heard time to hire be thrown around the market for so long. And for me, in majority of cases, that is a meaningless way of measuring the success and the awesome work that we do as a team.
Fantastic. We've got a comment or a question from Leandro, which I'm going to throw up in a second. But just before that, Joey, any data for you which we haven't talked about that you hear and you think, that's not worth anything, we should be avoiding that and moving away from? Anything that stands out to you?
It's going to be classic, but I agree with Nick. How do you measure the quality of hire right now? So there's a lot of velocity going on and the market is changing. So, quality of hire, how do you measure that? Where does it align on that one? So I would put it away. Just looking at the real market, like Nick explained to you, is literally see that how long it's going to take the hiring process, align with the hiring manager, explain them with the market reports and show them how difficulty, which is supply against demand, how does it look, and then agreed upon a kind of a process with your interview panels and everybody, then I think will be more valuable than just measuring time or the quality hire.
Gotcha. Thanks, Joey. Rassam, go on.
Yeah, just wanted to react on one point, which is this idea of length of time to hire or even time to fill, because it could be interesting. Data here can be interesting to slice and dice sometimes into details, because for instance, understanding that on a inside sales versus a senior software engineer, the time to between the moment the person accepts and starts within probation period, trial period, etc., from a country to another, there are some set of data that can from the start be interesting to say, like there is 1 month versus 3 months for sure in the past 6 months on this kind of populations. But I had just one example that came to mind is when you're kind of good at understanding really your niche kind of mapping of a function or location. You can, for instance, I think Joey, you were saying that you would calculate, how many inputs you need as a whole for 1 unit of output at every stage. So if a business comes and says, okay, for Q2, I need 15, we're going to hire 15 developers. And you can, from that moment say, well, either for talent mapping, like in this specific city, we've shown you that we've already like burned 80% of the market, so we only have X amount of candidates we can even outreach, versus we would, when with all of these hires, we would need this amount. This is the gap. Or our interviewing capacity, there's a gap of interviewing capacity, because to make that happen, we need to do 20 on-sites per week, but right now your team can only do 15. So those kind of conversations, I feel there's really an interest as well, because often you're with the business of people that are very pragmatic and need to be rational about it, and it can be also very useful.
Yeah, I think you made a good point over there. But there's always, I mean, from the sourcing point of view, there's always missing profiles out there. We can really dig into it and look at the area even further, and not just looking at within the well-known platform LinkedIn. You can go outside and do some X-ray searches and different over 60, 65 platform. You can look for the right profiles, especially software engineers. But again, it changes, depends on your tech stack. If you're looking for a Golang, if you added the DNI strategy into it, that changes the data. And if you're just looking for a skill set, that changes the data as well. So it all depends on the requirements from hiring, and your KPIs will create your sourcing strategy. Before you do that, you make sure your benchmarks are ready before you start your recruitment, and that will give you a kind of indication how long it's going to take and how hard it's going to be. Again, bear in mind, there's a demand and supply in the market, and everybody has a totally different expectations. There's a fintech, there's a startup, a different way of looking at for engineers to go, and there are different visions to go work for different companies. So these are also the data points we need to really consider. And also conversion ratios can help us, which I'm happy to explain later on how does it work around it, or how I work with it.
Cool. Thank you, Joe. I appreciate that. Oh, go on, Nick. Go on, jump in.
I was going to say, in terms of the context, I think it's great. But say KPIs, I think also as a TA function, we have so much more to deliver than just KPIs. So by taking that information, by deciding which KPIs you actually use and how you report that, you can then drive the data behind it and actually start, in my view, having more educated conversations with that. And the challenge that we have is, yes, you change that. How do you then measure quality of hire? How do you then, for example, look at, I mean, I appreciate everyone is obsessed about how much hiring is direct versus internal, but it doesn't, in some ways, it doesn't really matter. It is about the quality of hire, and within 6 months, most people have paid that off either way. Yes, we want to reduce the cost, but that quality, and then when you start having these conversations about the quality, you're bringing, I think, the whole TA function to actually a better view. And I'm very much a fan of having aggregate data. So yes, we have a cost then, but I don't want to break that down to how much is agency, how much is direct, how much is internal. We do obviously that behind the scenes, but the information I'm talking about is very much, I know, Rassam, you said it earlier, putting aggregated data and making sure the message is there. And when we have good stories, I make sure the team, we're all talking the same aggregate data. This is the hires we've had today. We've had some really successful roles. We brought in 4 senior hires in a certain area. We've helped an X area to build up. So you're driving the story the whole time, backed up with the data. And I think the thing we sort of miss out on, we become very KPI and very specific and very linear with a small data set. But it's about bringing that, making it real to the organization. And then they come to us asking for different performance success factors rather than just around KPIs and very clinical data sets, which is where historically we've come from.
Yeah, I think it's a good point. But also one thing I want to bring it, TA is not a function we sit down and, write the requirements and okay, we'll get back to you this time. TA is all about advisory. It's kind of market educate. So we need to also enhance that to our hiring managers. We are there to advise. We are there to bring it to, all those data and how things works within the market. It's not just about we place people in a certain time to certain time or how many people we serve. We are advisor, we are advocates, we are ambassador of the market for the candidate market. And let's put that, quality and also the value on our everything we do from a TA perspective.
Yeah, I love that word, actually, ambassador of the market. That's brilliant.
Yeah.
Very nice. Like that when we get that hashtag in. We've got a question from Leandro. So I'm just going to put it on the screen there, which I like it. And I'd be interested to hear from all of you three whether we are doing this, and if so, how we're doing it. So Leandro says, why aren't we all measuring hiring manager satisfaction? So automatically, he assumes we're not. Maybe we are. As an internal recruiter, it's as important to me as the candidate experience. What do you think? Nick, let's go to you. What do you reckon?
Yeah, I'm very happy to. In terms of measuring it, I'd love to say it's more sophisticated than this, but literally it is a part of a survey about a new joiner. We would divide the survey into looking at the external channel they've come through, the experience they've had with the TA team, then the onboarding, which for us sits within HR, and then the experience of them being onboarded to the business. So that holistically is collected as data. We are, say, on a journey, and I would like to be moving that information into a more informed perspective. But at the moment, it's very much commentary with some underlying stats behind it, but not anything I think that we're in a meaningful place to be able to say these are hires that are outstanding, as opposed to these are starts which are not saying sub-outstanding, but the great ones as opposed to the outstanding hires. And in terms of EVP, I mean, I absolutely believe it. It's ultimately everything from the moment, going back to the word ambassador, every single person who meets a candidate is an ambassador for that organisation, and about how you capture that. But it's not easy to measure. But I do think at least doing that touch point, that pulse point survey is a really good starting point for that information.
Rassam, what do you think?
Yeah, sure. Well, I think in the past, measuring this can always be a bit tricky because, first of all, you need to know how what kind of qualitative kind of KPIs you put into place. I remember a couple of years ago, we did like 3 months or 6 months after we hired someone. There was kind of star kind of ratio where the hiring manager would say, "I'm happy with this hire." So that meant that the recruiter had done a better job or less good job. Then we moved on, I think, into more of the candidate NPS kind of metrics, where even some tools, I think it was Star that we use for it, on the candidate and also on the hiring manager satisfaction, where they would get like every 2-3 weeks or once per month a kind of survey of either when the job was filled, like how satisfied are you with this kind of process, or later on, I think you can custom that. Maybe just to make myself a bit devil's advocate here, I would say that as I always tend to push my team and the business to see the TA as peers, and not only that we have internal clients, obviously stakeholder management, influencing the business, blah, 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 very important. But to make in some more toxic kind of cultures, if you put this a bit too soon, it can create a sensation that there's the internal client and recruitment is only the recruitment's job, whereas I see it as a more kind of collective peer-to-peer kind of relationship. So that's only the little nuance I would put. It depends the maturity of your hiring manager sometimes as well, if you want to put this in place as a real measure for your team.
Appreciate that. And Joey, anything to add on that?
No, it's very good points. I mean, bear in mind, is end of the day is hiring managers your stakeholders. You need to understand where they're coming from as well. I think it's more measuring it. Definitely should be, but anything you adding a value of your process and your engagement with your hiring managers, that will be the measure. So instead of they're chasing you, when they start to give them the right information and right time, and like as I said, show them what you're made of as a TA person, I think it's become a proper peerness and good collaboration with them, and everything you do will be more valuable, and hiring managers will be happy with you, and they will be always come to you for advice going forwards. But I'm totally agree with Nick and Sam as well.
And maybe just the point here is that it could be a bit tough to measure hiring satisfaction on the results that TA needs to provide versus maybe the qualitative kind of inputs per stage, because at the end of the day, if you put it on the whole kind of strategy, what is the strategy of the company? Why do we hire people? Is it because we need people as a workforce? Do we want to put more diversity? Do we want to have a better brand? Which is a bit different as well, because candidate experience versus hiring managers experience, sometimes, like most of the times, there's some common elements, but what candidates want sometimes is fairness, quick experiences, transparency on salaries. And what a hiring manager wants is being quick, hiring performant people, and cost effective, which sometimes isn't exactly the same needs. So it's hard to completely like have two kind of NPS and never really think of what's our common strategy as a company or as a business.
I mean, you're absolutely right, but if you create some proper SLAs and a process agreement alignment, that will avoid those kind of things, because this is where your in-text comes in. That is where your data point comes in to advise them what will happen, how we're going to do it. If you agreed upon all, I think, as expectation will be clear to one another for mutual benefits between both parties, right?
Yep.
Yeah. I think it goes back to said before, you can create your net promoter score or your net hiring score, and that gives you a single digit. But actually, it's the commentary behind that, how that's changed, what's improving. We've had, for example, X amount in the excellent category, just the overall experience. That's the stuff that adds real value to the business. And again, going back to it, I think the data sets can be very clinical, and it's as much commentary to explain those data sets to get the buy-in from the business and have those open conversations.
Yeah, absolutely. How to describe the data to your hiring manager, because they don't want to hear the data. How you put them, like you said, Nick, how to put the story right in front of them to be able to understand them. So how simple is that?
Yeah, I think for the hiring manager, the data is that empty seat next to them. It's like, where's that person? Where's that? That's all they care about. That's the data they care about. But if we're just moving on a little bit, I mean, I had a note on here to ask about how we actually measure hiring success. And I think we've talked about that a little bit, Nick, but I think there's more to say around that. So if I go to you on that one, how should we be doing that? Hiring success, quality of hire, what's the best ways to do that?
Yeah, I mean, there's a number of my personal experience. I've worked with Lean in the past. I'm not actually where I am now. That's a really good way of going out to hiring managers. It's quite intimidating, I think, having run a project before, to go to hiring managers. So whoever the recruiter who was working with that hiring manager, they would go to another one. So no one got direct feedback from that, and it was all brought in. Then the commentary from that was taken to actually an HR team and discussed about how to move forward. And it was just looking at tiny points of further improvement that we could do. So that's quite a simple way of doing things, a survey wise. And the other one I think is as you say, going back to the business and asking for the candidate experience and also the hiring manager experience, and then working together for this. It's quite topical, but a net hiring score, which I love because that's very specific to our industry, and that's really, it's determining the success of the character, the fit of the individual against their own personal attributes and potential, compared to the actual role, responsibilities, company culture, and all of that. So that's a really nice way of doing it. So it does give you a very precise way of measuring that, but there's different ways of doing it. But I think it's being bold and going to business and saying, we're looking to improve what is a very good process already. How can you help us do that? And when you get the buy-in from that, it's interesting. I think the hiring managers become your star hiring managers, because you've had that experience. You've gone to them and said, it's not always perfect. How do we make things even better? How do we make your experience better? And the fact we're investing in doing that, everyone I found is very, very open, and actually becomes a further engaged stakeholder in the business.
Joey, anything you want to add in terms of measuring hiring success?
Well, as I mentioned that before, is getting that data and create a benchmark, because data is today, we can use it, and then how are we going to use that data for later on as well? That is important, because everything is changing, and how can we use that data for going forward? That also helps as well, because when you go to your intake meetings or try to explain or your workforce planning, when you look at the measures, you need to look at it at the back. In the past, what was happening, and what was the result of your efforts, recruitment or sourcing efforts. Take it and try to implement it today's world, and that could be anything. And then you can work on it, such as today is one of the most important trend is the adding the success, not just about your recruitment efforts, your employee branding as well. So you need to make sure you use those. Again, I'm going to go to conversion ratios. If you measure them, take it and mix it all together and create a strategy from your benchmark with the current market, and then you will be making a more success out of going forward, because you will be acting more facts and figures than hopes and dreams going forward.
Appreciate that. Thanks, Joey. And Rassam, if we change it up a little bit here and talk about candidate feedback, and of course that ties into candidate experience. How important is our measuring of this, and how should we be using that to improve our processes throughout the business?
Yeah, nice one. And maybe just to get back on the last one, which is how we measure successes, is just to define how we bring value as well, because either we say recruitment brings value because we're hiring top talent that are going to be performant in the business and create revenue for the company. So this is why you're successful and valuable for us as a recruiter to the organization. And in that moment, I think, and specifically now where the talent reskilling, training, HR kind of functions are getting more and more close to, it's not only about bringing people, but making them stay, making them, evolve and being happy and reskill, etc., is really a good conversation to have, and interesting to see how the net attrition that you were talking about, Nick, sorry, is defined exactly. Is it about talent reviews, 6 months performance, etc., bonus payouts? I don't know. And so those that is the first kind of value you can see, and the other value is also about the niche core competency that we have as TA functions in sourcing, in closing, in competency-based interviews, in diversity kind of, and so training the business, training hiring managers on how to source, how to do competency-based interviews, how to close a candidate, and be good at every step, etc., is a really valuable kind of thing that so being successful, it can also not only how we hire, but what kind of people we hire, but also in that process how we educate and train the hiring manager and the business into our expertise. And sorry, so to go back to your question, which was, I think, about candidate experience and how we include candidate experience into the way we work. Was that?
Yeah, exactly. How should we be measuring it, and how does that tie into our overall processes and how we're using it?
So I'll be quick on this one, but like basically I don't know exactly how I feel today. I feel I went very far before in some kind of organizations on being very granular on what emotions candidates need to feel when they first get contacted, get a message in the process, when they get the offer, pre-onboarding, and there would be NPS kind of different kind of questions that would be sent, and we would track this and trend and see trends, etc. In reality, I don't know exactly how effective this has been to really change things, because there's big kind of elements that candidates want to see: transparency, quick processes, fairness, etc. And I don't see I haven't seen so much how measuring it with NPS, like tooling it, has been helpful versus kind of big intuitions that you have when you do something. So it's a difficult one, because again, business experience, hiring manager experience sometimes isn't exactly what you need to put in place to get the better candidate experience. So yeah, I'm not sure exactly how to do it today.
Any thoughts from you, Joey, on the candidate experience question?
Yeah, I think it's top priority should be. We should really get the feedbacks in every time. I mean, from my point of view, I think all the candidates are very valuable, and their feedbacks in depends on which area they are, or which the level they're in. And I always get the feedback, because what I created in the last place I was working with, we created kind of pop-up questions after the interviews. We always get that feedback, trying to understand our hiring communications, how fast it was, and how clear for them to understand the role and stuff. I think it's very important, really, really important to get feedback that will help us to improve our process in a better level, communication wise, our application process wise, and also to give the right message to candidates as a kind of a culture, recruitment culture on that one.
It's same with the hiring managers. It's the invested in. and having the confidence to go to them and ask not masses of their time, but enough to get their input, because it does make people feel special. And the fact we're engaged as senior individuals in the business, and we have the ability to make a difference with the data that we collect, the information that we collect, that's so key. And that in itself is a really important part of it. It's interesting, a lot of people join, they go through the onboarding, they go to the hiring managers, and they come and meet us, and they're so excited to meet us. It's been such an amazing journey they've been on, and it's lovely to get that engagement. And sometimes I think we forget what a privileged position we are in, taking people through major life changes, moving between jobs, and the journey you go on with them, rather than just let them disappear into the business and carry on their onboarding. We're actually an integral part of the business. And again, I use the word ambassador a lot anyway, but we are ambassador for the business, and it's lovely for them to have people they can really connect with when they join. And it's great for us to get that feedback from them, and also continuously look to improve our own processes.
Yeah, love that. Thanks, Nick. Appreciate that. And then a couple more questions, guys, conscious of time. So I think there's a lot of lost skills in talent acquisition. I think sometimes we forget some of the fundamentals, but I think actually one of the newer ones is actually the ability to gather, use and share data effectively. So are we training our TA functions in the best way to kind of have this front of mind, not just from a senior level, like the positions you three are in, but our more junior people? Are we training our TA functions to use the data effectively? Joey, do you have any thoughts on this at all?
Yeah, we have to. Everything's changed, expectation changed. It's become a very competitive market. We have to, at every opportunity, we need to look at the new trends. We need to follow enhance our skill set towards to it, because age is changing as well. So communication ways of changing. Now here we are. We used to do this in a different places. We're doing it. So, and we have to adapt the changes, and therefore we need to train ourselves to the latest trends. Basically, we have to.
Appreciate that. Thanks, Joey. And then Nick, in this market, how accurate do you think we can be in terms of forecasting whether roles will be filled on time?
Oh, that's tough. Now, to go back to Joey first, I want to just say one thing. For me, it's all about adapt or die, which is a concept, but that's what we have to constantly look at. In terms of, I don't know, it's really, in terms of the whole experience, we just need to be looking to do, I think, better quality experience, and trying to get more engagement and involvement. And when we use the data, again, going back to it, we have the ability to put some really very, very detailed data together, but I question the value of that, and almost aggregating the data at different levels of experience across the business. Who wants to be exposed to the large aggregate, the trends, the where we're going as a journey, as opposed to the very small aspects of the particular within, I say, 3 hires in a department in a year, but the ability to go between the different ranges and present that correctly.
Rassam, do you have anything to add on that in terms of the accuracy we can have in terms of our forecasting whether roles will be filled on time?
I mean, there's always ways to be more accurate. I mean, or think that you're going to be more accurate on forecasting. It's really for me, the most efficient way I've discovered in the past years is reverse engineering the set of data you have on a specific pipeline and saying like, okay, well, in the past 6 months, we needed X amount of this at every stage of outreach, phone screens, first interview, last rounds, offers to make one hire. This means if we reverse engineer on the target, this means this amount. So it helps, obviously, if you only want to, give a number. If you correlate that with the notice period kind of reality from a country to another on a specific job function to another, you can, I think, get quite accurate on the number of how many sprints or days you would need to make a hire. But as Nick said, I think that is not enough anymore, because again, from my experience, it was the hyper growth kind of companies that were only focused on this. I don't care exactly about the rest. I want the seat to be filled because we need to hire more people, because there's a fundraising coming on. We need to burn the cash of this and this, etc. In the current kind of market that I see, where hyper growth is less and less decorrelated from the quality of hires, of how we have already a workforce that we need to keep or reskill, etc. We need to understand other kind of aspects of what a hiring and a forecast of a hiring means. So I don't have the answers yet of all the others. I have been very granular on the first one, which is being kind of mathematical about it, and reverse engineering was great. But yeah, I think that in the coming months, there's going to be a lot of opportunities to see it in another way. And maybe to finish on, because the question about the way we train about all this is interesting. I think that one major element that made me rethink a lot of the ways I see and perceive the skilling we need to have as recruiters is the content creation. Something that was seen really as a plus, or only for extroverts, or only for top brand companies that needed to do a lot of communication or marketing, has become for me like the essence of everything we need to do to work with the business, with recruiters, to understand what is our employee value proposition, and how we make that story relevant, consistent on LinkedIn, on different kind of social medias, for the market, with transparency and being really consistent about it. And that is quite harsh and quite hard, to make that switch, because a lot of the people in business especially see that just as a bullshit kind of communication skill.
Appreciate that. Thanks, Rassam. So look, I'm gonna finish off with one final question. We've got people watching this and who'll be listening to it on the podcast catch up, who are in their businesses. They're at varying degrees with their use of data. You know, some will be doing an absolutely high level with it. Some of them won't even have started using data or using it in an appropriate way. But Joey, what advice would you give to talent teams who want to get their use of data in order? What's the kind of like top line stuff you'd recommend?
Well, I would recommend, I always say, create some conversion ratios for hard to fill roles. That will give them a proper data, not just giving a data to hiring manager, also for their performance as well. That will help them, creating a conversion ratio, help them to improve their communication, reach out. They will improve their channels, which channels they need to reach out to for that specific skill set. That will help them to understand your company, where they stand within the markets, because that connections will give them a answer like, which company again? Which company you calling me from? I never heard them. So these are important parts. I think creating that conversion ratios will be so valuable going forward for your performance and for make the hire more successful and adding a value to it as well.
Thanks, Joey. Nick, same question to you. Apart from listening to this webinar or podcast, what advice would you give to talent teams around this?
So, I mean, the reality is, as a TA function, we are now a data-driven function. I know we've talked about different wording for that. There's no way of getting around from it. I think coming into an organization, make sure you've got the right ATS, make sure you're working with the right integrated systems, that you can get the information. I would definitely say go to the business, spend some time with some analysts, see what information is being reported up the upper echelons, see where the C-suite's sitting, try and then create a dashboard or a way of looking at the data that we're producing as closely aligned to business. I mean, ideally, you want to be a subset of that data, so everyone's talking the same language. And then from that, I think it's a constant journey. There are things that we can recruit with very distinctly. We can say, for example, go back to the direct and internal hires. We can go back to data like that, but for me it's all about elevating that to the next level, putting the commentary behind it, and then there's some really good conversation which again people can read about out there. There's lots of people doing some really cool stuff, but particularly for me around its net hiring score and the hiring velocity. They're two key different metrics which I genuinely believe add more value to what we're doing, rather than possibly a slightly drier metrics that have been used in the past and people still use in business. So think about how we can really show what we do in a business capacity, and that will in themselves give us more credibility as a function, because we need to be speaking the language of the C-suite to really, in my view, get the recognition for the great work we have done. And historically we've done that great work, but we haven't been very good at representing it, and the world we're in, the way to elevate that is definitely through using data correctly, and making sure it's in the right presentation for all levels of the business.
Strong finish. Thanks, Nick. And finally from you, Rassam.
Yeah, well, again, everything that is said, great. I agree, and I like the fact of asking. If you're a recruiter and you haven't dealt with data yet, but you know that your manager is doing like monthly reports with in a kind of meeting where you never go. Well, ask to see those reports. What's on them? How do you build them today with your manager, and understand exactly how he understands. If you're a TA leader that doesn't have access to that, but you know that your CEO is doing that for the board, ask your CEO, what does the board want to know about recruitment? What do you tell them when you don't have the answer? Where can I add more value for you, etc. So getting in those conversations, just simply asking who needs what and what already exists can be interesting. And the other one would be just I'm not sure it's all about data, but individually, if you look on where you spend the most of your time in a week, like let's say you only hire data engineers in the past 6 months, well, ask it or make the effort of getting the information of the source of hires. I really feel that this is a great way of understanding, do you put the right moments of your week? Like, let's say that you look back in the 6 past months, you've done 20 hires as data engineer, 80% of them are applicants. And when you look at your the next week and your week, you spend X amounts of time in sourcing or in referral versus rewriting the job applications or working on the conversions of other places for job boards, etc. So understanding the conversion rate of today doesn't mean you need to not change anything, but just to see, is it coherent with the time I spent every week doing calls or sourcing or being in this place or that place? It can be helpful as well.
Fantastic. Thanks, Rassam. Appreciate what you've been saying. Questions just come up. Just put it on the screen, shall I quickly? Elise says something that can be helpful to build the first data sets for a TA managers to our sales teams, which KPIs they track and how they structure their reports. Many sales KPIs can be applied to TA. Absolutely agree. But we're just about running out of time. Rassam, if anyone wants to ask you questions, pick your brain. What's the best way for them to do so?
LinkedIn,
my man. Nick, what's the best way if anyone wants to contact you? Is that okay?
LinkedIn, it is the way. So there we go. I'll see people in cyberspace.
And Joey, do you want everyone to catch up with you on TikTok? Is that what we want
to? No, it's LinkedIn. I absolutely agree with it. LinkedIn.
Oh, lovely. All right. Thank you, you three, for your insights today. I've really enjoyed the conversation. Audience, I hope you have as well. Thanks for locking on. Thanks for listening. Thanks for viewing. And we'll see you next week. Next week on the live webinar, we're going to be talking about how to scale a business sensibly. So don't miss that. And I will see you next week.
Great. Thanks, Paul. Appreciate it.
Bye.
Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye.